It began with a quiet discovery buried deep within palace. Records officials reported were never expected to attract public attention. At first, it sounded like little more than an administrative detail involving access to one of the monarchy's most important institutions. But when reports emerged suggesting that Queen Camilla had been barred from entering the Privy Council Chambers, long-standing debates suddenly reignited. What seemed like a forgotten procedural matter quickly evolved into a story about authority, tradition, and Princess Anne's role in defending royal protocol. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, few people outside royal circles paid much attention to the reports. Palace records rarely become the center of public fascination, and procedural matters are usually left to historians, constitutional experts, and those responsible for managing royal affairs behind closed doors. Yet something about this discovery felt different. The moment questions emerged regarding access to the Privy Council Chambers, observers immediately recognized that the issue touched one of the most sensitive areas of royal governance. What had initially appeared to be a forgotten administrative detail suddenly carried implications far beyond its original context. According to royal commentators, the renewed attention stemmed from the symbolic importance of the chambers themselves. Throughout modern royal history, the Privy Council has occupied a unique position within the constitutional framework of the monarchy. It is associated with matters of state, formal advice, and some of the most important governmental procedures connected to the crown. Access has traditionally been governed by carefully defined rules, making any discussion of restrictions or exclusions a matter of considerable interest. Once the reports began circulating, palace observers quickly found themselves revisiting conversations that many believed had long been settled. As interest grew, attention increasingly focused on Queen Camilla's reported role within these historical discussions. Questions emerged regarding what authority, responsibilities, or expectations may have existed at the time. While definitive answers remained elusive, the uncertainty itself became a source of fascination. Some commentators argued the records reflected nothing more than standard constitutional practice. Others believed the discovery offered insight into deeper debates concerning influence, protocol, and the boundaries that define royal responsibilities. The more theories circulated, the more difficult it became to separate procedural questions from broader institutional concerns. What made the story particularly compelling was the way it unexpectedly brought Princess Anne back into the center of public discussion. For years, Anne has been viewed by many royal watchers as one of the monarchy's most consistent defenders of tradition and constitutional discipline. Her reputation for placing duty above personal relationships has become a defining feature of her public image. As historical details resurfaced, observers began examining whether concerns she was once rumored to have supported were now being viewed in an entirely different light. Meanwhile, constitutional experts and royal historians reportedly started revisiting older discussions regarding protocol and governance. The records themselves may have been historical, but the questions they raised felt remarkably contemporary. In a period of significant transition for the monarchy, every debate involving authority and institutional responsibility carries added weight. What begins as a discussion about the past often becomes a conversation about the future. That growing realization helped transform the story from a historical curiosity into a genuine royal controversy. The more people examined the records, the more they discovered questions that reached far beyond a single individual or a single decision. Beneath the surface lay a larger debate about who holds influence, who safeguards tradition, and how constitutional principles are preserved during times of change. And as those questions continued to spread throughout royal circles, one truth became increasingly impossible to ignore. The controversy was never simply about access, it was about who was entrusted to stand at the heart of royal decision-making. To many outside the monarchy, the Privy Council Chambers may appear to be just another historic royal room. Yet, for those familiar with Britain's constitutional traditions, the chambers symbolize centuries of authority, governance, and confidential state business. As attention turned toward the reported restrictions, observers found themselves examining the deeper significance of the institution itself. The growing fascination surrounding the controversy was driven largely by a simple realization. The Privy Council Chambers occupy a place unlike almost any other within the constitutional framework of the monarchy. While royal residences, ceremonial halls, and historic palaces often capture public imagination, the chambers are associated with something far more consequential. They are linked to the machinery of governance itself, a place where constitutional processes, formal advice, and matters of state have traditionally intersected with the authority of the crown. That history alone ensured that any discussion involving access would immediately attract serious attention. For centuries, the Privy Council has played an important role in supporting the functioning of government. Although its responsibilities have evolved over time, it remains connected to some of the monarchy's most significant constitutional traditions. Royal historians frequently point out that many of the institution's procedures are rooted in practices established generations ago. Those traditions are not maintained simply for ceremonial purposes. They exist to preserve continuity, protect confidentiality, and reinforce the distinction between symbolic roles and official responsibilities. It was precisely that distinction that became increasingly relevant as the controversy gained momentum. According to constitutional commentators, one of the most important principles surrounding the Privy Council involves understanding the difference between participation in royal ceremonies and involvement in governmental processes. While many members of the royal family carry public responsibilities, not all positions are connected to constitutional decision-making. The monarchy functions through carefully defined boundaries, and those boundaries often determine who participates in particular aspects of institutional life. As observers revisited these traditions, security considerations also became a central part of the discussion. Matters connected to the Privy Council frequently involve confidential information, sensitive procedures, and protocols designed to safeguard the integrity of governmental operations. For that reason, access has historically been governed by strict rules rather than personal preference. Experts noted that restrictions surrounding certain areas are often less about individuals and more about preserving the structures that support constitutional stability. The more analysts explained these principles, the more public interest seemed to grow. What initially appeared to be a narrow procedural matter gradually transformed into a broader lesson about how the monarchy operates behind the scenes. Many people who had never previously considered the role of the Privy Council suddenly found themselves examining its significance. Questions surrounding authority, access, and institutional responsibility became intertwined with the larger story that had begun unfolding through the palace records. At the same time, royal commentators emphasized that understanding the chambers required understanding the values they represent. Continuity, confidentiality, constitutional discipline. These principles have shaped royal governance for generations and continue to influence how decisions are approached today. The controversy, therefore, was never solely about who could or could not enter a particular room. It reflected a much deeper conversation about the preservation of long-standing traditions during a period of significant transition for the monarchy. And as the significance of the institution became clearer, attention naturally shifted toward another question that many observers found impossible to ignore. If the chambers were protected by such carefully maintained traditions, how had questions regarding access emerged in the first place, and what circumstances had brought those historical decisions back into the spotlight? According to royal commentators, interest intensified when archived records reportedly resurfaced during discussions about constitutional protocol. What initially appeared to be a routine review soon generated widespread curiosity among palace observers. As details circulated, questions emerged regarding precedent, authority, and whether long-forgotten decisions carried greater meaning than anyone originally realized. At first, the records attracted attention only among a relatively small group of constitutional experts and royal historians. Archived documents are reviewed regularly and most rarely generate significant public interest. Yet reports suggest that this particular review uncovered references that immediately stood out to those familiar with royal procedure. What appeared to be a simple administrative notation suddenly became the center of a much larger discussion. The more closely observers examined the material, the more they suspected that the records contained insights into decisions that had shaped royal protocol for years. According to palace commentators, advisors reportedly began revisiting procedural decisions connected to the operation of the Privy Council and its associated traditions. Such reviews are often undertaken to ensure continuity and preserve institutional memory. However, in this instance, the process appeared to raise fresh questions rather than provide straightforward answers. Why had certain decisions been made? What circumstances influenced them? And perhaps most importantly, were those judgments still relevant today? The search for clarity only seemed to deepen the intrigue. As details circulated through royal circles, questions regarding precedent quickly moved to the forefront of the conversation. Constitutional institutions often rely upon established practices developed over generations. Once a precedent exists, it can influence future decisions long after the original circumstances have been forgotten. This reality led many observers to wonder whether the records represented more than historical documentation. Some believed they offered evidence of a broader philosophy regarding access, authority, and institutional responsibility. The debate that followed was anything but unanimous. Royal commentators advanced competing interpretations, each attempting to explain the significance of the findings. Some argued that the records simply reflected practical decisions made within a specific historical context. Others suggested they revealed deliberate efforts to preserve constitutional boundaries that remain important today. The absence of definitive explanations allowed multiple narratives to flourish simultaneously, ensuring that interest continued to grow rather than fade. As often happens with royal controversies, public curiosity soon expanded beyond specialist circles. What began as an internal discussion among historians and protocol experts gradually captured the attention of wider audiences. Every new interpretation generated additional speculation. Every unanswered question encouraged further analysis. The records themselves may have been historical, but the issues they raised felt remarkably relevant to a monarchy navigating a period of transition and uncertainty. Reports also suggested that awareness of the controversy eventually reached increasingly senior figures within royal circles. Whether through formal briefings or ongoing discussions, the matter was reportedly attracting attention at levels far beyond those initially involved. In the review, that development alone reinforced perceptions that the records carried significance extending well beyond routine archival work. Observers began wondering whether the rediscovered information might reshape understanding of events that had long been viewed through a different lens. What made the situation particularly compelling was the growing realization that every answer seemed to lead back to the past. The further commentators explored the records, the more they found themselves examining earlier decisions, earlier assumptions, and earlier judgments that had influenced the monarchy's constitutional traditions. It became increasingly clear that understanding the present controversy required understanding the reasoning behind those historical choices. And as officials continued their examination, one conclusion began emerging with greater force. The deeper they looked into the records, the more they found themselves revisiting judgments made years earlier, decisions that would soon to become central to the unfolding story. Long before the current discussion resurfaced, Princess Anne had earned a reputation for placing duty and institutional continuity above personal preference. Reports suggest that whenever questions involving constitutional boundaries arose, she consistently favored established precedent. It was this unwavering approach that would later cause many observers to view the resurfaced records in an entirely different light. For decades, Princess Anne has occupied a unique position within the royal family. While public attention has often focused on more prominent figures, Anne quietly developed a reputation for discipline, consistency, and an almost uncompromising commitment to the institution she serves. Royal historians frequently point to her long record of public service as evidence of a philosophy built around responsibility rather than popularity. That reputation would become increasingly relevant as debate surrounding the Privy Council records continued to grow. According to royal commentators, Anne's approach has always been shaped by a belief that constitutional traditions exist for a reason. Throughout her years of royal duty, she has often been associated with a preference for established procedures, particularly when questions of governance and protocol are involved. While others may have viewed certain issues through personal or political lenses, Anne was frequently perceived as evaluating matters according to institutional principles. It was precisely this consistency that caused many observers to revisit her role once the archived records attracted renewed attention. As historians examined previous episodes involving royal protocol, a recurring theme began to emerge. Time and again, Anne appeared connected to efforts aimed at preserving continuity during periods of uncertainty. Whether dealing with ceremonial obligations, constitutional responsibilities, or questions involving royal precedent, she reportedly favored approaches that reinforced stability rather than experimentation. To supporters, this demonstrated a deep understanding of how institutions endure. To critics, it sometimes appeared rigid, yet few disputed the consistency of her position. That consistency became central to the growing debate. The resurfaced records encouraged commentators to look beyond the controversy itself and examine the broader philosophy that may have influenced earlier decisions. If constitutional boundaries had been maintained in a particular way, what principles guided those choices? Were they driven by circumstances unique to the time, or did they reflect a deeper commitment to preserving institutional integrity? These questions increasingly led analysts back to Anne's long-established perspective. Royal historians also noted that continuity has remained one of the defining themes of Anne's public life. In a monarchy built upon tradition, continuity serves as more than a ceremonial concept. It provides predictability during change and stability during uncertainty. Supporters argued that Anne's emphasis on preserving those principles helped explain why she was often viewed as one of the monarchy's most dependable guardians. The more people discussed the records, the more frequently her name appeared within conversations about constitutional discipline and long-term stewardship. As public interest expanded, debate over Anne's reported position became increasingly intense. Some commentators suggested the records reinforced views she had allegedly supported for years. Others argued that later interpretations may have exaggerated her influence. Yet regardless of where opinions differed, there was growing agreement that her reputation for defending protocol had become impossible to separate from the controversy itself. What once seemed like a minor historical detail was now being interpreted through the lens of decades of public service and institutional loyalty. The result was a fascinating shift in perspective. The discussion was no longer focused solely on what the records contained. It had become a broader examination of the principles that shaped royal decision-making and the individuals who spent years defending them. And as observers continued exploring those deeper questions, it became increasingly clear that Anne's reported stance could not be fully understood in isolation. Only when the wider implications began emerging would many commentators believe they finally understood why those long-standing positions mattered so much in the first place. As more observers examined the controversy, the discussion quickly evolved beyond a single procedural matter. For supporters of Princess Anne, the records appeared to validate concerns she had allegedly expressed for years regarding constitutional discipline and institutional safeguards. Others argued the issue reflected broader tensions concerning influence, responsibility, and the future balance of power within the monarchy. What made the story so compelling was that it gradually stopped being about a chamber, a record, or even a specific decision. Instead, it became a debate about the principles that guide the monarchy itself. Supporters viewed Anne's apparent vindication as evidence that long-established constitutional boundaries still mattered, especially during a period of significant change. Critics, however, questioned whether historical decisions should continue carrying the same influence in a modern royal era. As competing interpretations emerged, public interest only continued to grow. Years after the original decisions were reportedly made, their significance remained a subject of discussion among historians, constitutional experts, and royal commentators. Many pointed to the episode as an example of how seemingly minor procedural rules can reveal deeper truths about governance, accountability, and institutional resilience. Questions about authority, influence, and responsibility became central themes, transforming the controversy into something far larger than its original circumstances. At the heart of the debate was a fundamental question: should royal institutions be guided primarily by tradition, or should they adapt to changing expectations? For some observers, the records reinforced the importance of continuity and established precedent. For others, they highlighted the ongoing challenge of balancing personal relationships with constitutional responsibilities. Either way, the discussion increasingly focused on public trust and the belief that institutions remain strongest when their principles are applied consistently. By this stage, the controversy was no longer centered on a chamber. It had become a debate about royal responsibility itself, a conversation about duty, resilience, and the values expected to guide future generations of the monarchy. And as attention gradually shifted toward the future, another question emerged with growing urgency. What role would these same principles play in shaping the monarchy's next chapter? For many analysts, the most important aspect of the story was never the restriction itself. Instead, it was what the incident suggested about future leadership within the monarchy. As Britain enters a new royal era, every debate involving protocol, authority, and constitutional tradition carries implications that extend far beyond the present moment. As discussions continued, attention increasingly shifted toward the future rather than the past. Commentators began examining what the controversy revealed about the values expected to guide the next generation of royal leadership. Names such as Prince William and Princess Catherine frequently entered the conversation, not because they were directly connected to the historical records, but because many observers viewed them as central figures in shaping the monarchy's future direction. The debate became less about a specific procedural decision and more about the principles future leaders would be expected to uphold. In the end, the story endured because it was never truly about a room, a record, or a procedural restriction. It was about legacy, responsibility, and the enduring belief that institutions survive only when their rules are respected. According to many royal analysts, the episode offered a revealing glimpse into how the monarchy balances personal relationships against constitutional duty. Questions of consistency, stewardship, and public trust remained at the center of the discussion, reinforcing the idea that long-term stability depends upon the careful preservation of established principles. The controversy also reinforced Princess Anne's reputation among supporters as a figure associated with duty and institutional continuity. Whether one agreed with every interpretation of the records or not, few disputed that the debate highlighted the importance of clear constitutional boundaries. By this stage, the records had become a symbol of something far larger than a single royal disagreement. They represented the ongoing challenge of preserving tradition while navigating change, protecting public confidence while adapting to a new era, and ensuring that future generations inherit not only royal titles, but also a deep respect for the responsibilities attached to them. Because in the end, royal institutions endure not through privilege alone, but through the willingness to protect the principles that sustain them. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.